Hi, everybody. I see some familiar faces out there joining us this morning, and you're very welcome to this workshop with Paul Woolflight. I'm just going to briefly say that I've worked with Paul and known Paul since I think way back in 2008. He's been an important, I say, mentor, personally and professionally supported me in the work here in Ireland, overseeing the perpetrator programs with the Men's Development Network. And Paul has been working with male perpetrators of domestic violence since 1992, initially at the Everland Centre in Brixton, London, and since 1996 at Ahimsa in Plymouth. His experience in this field includes development and implementation of group programs, individual counselling, supervision, and other workers, liaison with women's services, and liaison with statutory agencies. He was one of the founding members of Respect UK, the National Association for Domestic Perpetrator Programs and Associated Support Services, and was vice chair of the executive for a number of years. So look, I won't say anything more, only I really value Paul's input, and I'm delighted to have him here for this day on the 25th celebration of the Men's Development Network. So I hand you over to the safe hands of Paul Woolflight.
Okay, thank you, John. I think that's quite enough about me. So what I'd like to start with, I think we've probably got everyone who's coming in, and if anyone else comes in, well, it's fine. I would like to start with just 3 or 4 minutes. We'll do it fairly shortly, but it's just to have just a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of just, especially anything that's on a Zoom or a screen, it's a chance of just getting a little more attuned to our own bodies and how we actually are feeling. So if you'd kind of indulge me in that, I would be very grateful. So I'll just ask you, just get comfortable, however you actually are. And it's just an opportunity to be a little more attentive to what's happening internally. It's an opportunity just to focus on, well, what am I experiencing inside? And invariably there will be thoughts in your mind. That's fine, not a problem. But it's helpful if they can be just a little in the background. They're not dominating, they're not taking over. And what really supports that is that I'm paying more attention to what I'm experiencing in my body, the level of sensation and feelings. It can be helpful if your feet are on the floor, or whichever part of your body you can feel connected most to the ground. Just to feel that sensation and just get the sense you're being supported there. Not floating in space, you're actually supported by the ground, by the earth. At the same time, being aware of your breath as you breathe in and breathe out. Just very ordinary, nothing special in terms of how you breathe. But there's also supporting you. Every breath, literally keeping it alive. These sensations are just already present. You don't need to do anything to make them happen. They're already happening. Just a simple way to bring your attention a little more to your body. And then just to notice other sensations or feelings that might be there. There's always a lot happening in the body. A lot of it pretty subtle, but all happening simultaneously. You're never just one single experience when you're paying attention. And the more I'm aware of my body experience, it much more brings me into the present moment. Because at the level of my body, everything is in the present. There's no past or future at the level of direct body experience. It's always now. And just being aware of this as well. If I'm a little more connected with my body, it also can be a little easier to connect with just how my heart is right now. Notice it's fairly open. I'm referring right now to the degree of openness. I feel fairly open. I feel a little more closed, a little guarded, distracted, a little frustrated. I'm coming in and I don't know quite what's going on at this moment. It's whatever it is. There's no right or wrong. No right or wrong to any of this. Sometimes you'll be a bit more open, sometimes a little more closed. But it's very helpful to notice. Oh yeah, I'm feeling a little more closed in this. What's that like? How does that affect the rest of the experience? If you're feeling a little more open, what's that like? And it's all very dynamic. It can change very quickly from more open to more closed, or more closed to more open. And just be with it, just from curiosity, no judgment, right or wrong. So just being aware of these three particular dimensions of your being, your mind, your heart, your body. So just take another minute. It's an opportunity just for you to be with you, just as you are. Nothing else you need to attend to. And just notice how that is, and however it is. You might find you're getting bored, and just notice that. Okay, I'm getting bored. You can include that. Don't have to change anything. So you can still stay open to, okay, I'm bored. What else might be happening? Okay, thank you. So I'm aware quite a number of people came in the middle of that, but I guess I hope you got whatever you can from it. It's one of the issues with time compression. But yeah. So welcome. I would normally like to have a little statement from everybody, but I'm just aware we've got just over half an hour because we started late anyway. So I'm gonna kind of just start just saying a little bit about basically what I want to talk about, behavior change in men. So as John said, I've worked with violent, abusive guys for a long time, but I don't just work with men or women for that matter in those areas. And looking at behavior change, particularly in relationship to men, doesn't matter, I think whatever context you're in, a lot of these principles still apply. So let's put 2 or 3 things in here that feel quite essential. First, if you're going to change any behavior, change anything about yourself, you've got to be aware of it. Like, awareness clearly is a fundamental part of any kind of change. You don't know what you're doing and how you're doing it, you're just going to carry on doing it, whatever that might be. So working with awareness is crucial. But the other part, if you're working with someone, is relationship. That you're working with someone in relationship. And the important bit here is the maintenance of relationship. Because if you work with anybody in anything that's difficult, the reality is there will be times there'll be a break in the relationship, in sessions, in groups, whatever. And the art is to pick up that and immediately, basically you relate with the break as a way of restoring, if possible, the connection. And this feels really important in terms of particularly working with men, because having worked with men in different situations, often there's not a lot of awareness at what I would call an embodied level. There's kind of a lot of thoughts going on, a lot of ideas about themselves and about everything else and everyone else, but not a lot of connection with what's the experience on a sensation feeling level that actually is underlying all that. So having an embodied connection feels really essential. At the same time, if I'm looking at, again, working with men generally, often there's a tendency to focus on the outside rather than the inside, which would go a little with what I've said. But often the outside is often not related with, in what I would call a participatory, connective way. It's often objectified. And I'm not just talking about people here. I'm looking about the entire environment, that objectification. So there's often an experience with men in terms of behavior change of not feeling supported. And often what you're looking at is, it's not that they're not supported, because we're supported all the time. We'd be dead if we weren't supported. We couldn't even exist. But there's a tendency, A, not to notice the support that's there, and B, at times, not really looking for support, but looking to be looked after. And that's very different. This planet, including us as people, supports every one of us all the time, but it definitely doesn't look after us. That's not the same. And getting that shift, and I would put, that's a shift from an adult perspective to a child perspective. And I would say part of the difficulty is a lot of men, when I work with them, are kind of often fall into this child perspective of expecting someone to somehow, the world, whatever, to look after them, to give them what they need, to actually somehow appreciate and value them without getting, they're not doing it for themselves. They're not actually recognizing this needs to come from me. I need to be able to find this in me. Yeah. So that orientation, again, coming back to relationship and awareness of what's going on in me, but relating with what's going on in me, awareness of interest in what's happening outside, but in and as itself rather than as something for me. Yeah, doesn't mean I can't be receiving, but also be interested in how is the world, how are they, how's the other, not just how am I. Both. It's not an either or. So, okay, that's a kind of little just overview of where I'm coming from, which may or may not make a lot of sense to people. I'm kind of playing this a little bit off the top of my head looking at this workshop, because I have not a lot of time to say an awful lot, so I'm having to kind of give it a little bit broad brushstrokes. So awareness, let's get a little focused on practice then. And I mean, that's why what I'd call, well, what is generally spoken of as mindfulness. And I'm going to be very specific about this in terms of how I would be looking at that, because it's not a term I would use originally, but it's very commonly used, so it can be helpful as giving an orientation. The essence of mindfulness is being aware of my, if you like, direct experience. I'm not just in the experience with that direct awareness. I've got space around it, and I can notice what my direct experience is. From this place, I have choice. If I am locked in direct experience and I'm caught up in it, it doesn't feel like I've got choice. It doesn't stop me being responsible for what I'm doing, but from the inside, it doesn't feel like I can do anything different. So working with someone in terms of giving them a basic technique that enables them to be a little more spacious, a little more, what I call it, able to take a perspective on their experience at the time. And that's where mindfulness comes in, at the most basic level, creating a basic sense of space so I can see, okay, this is what's happening. What do I want to do? Rather than this is what's happening, I'm caught in it. And let's put it in a simple context. We don't need to go very far with this in terms of anything overly complicated. Anytime you get caught up in a worrying, nagging about something or other in your mind, and you're not doing anything constructive, it's not helpful, but you're kind of stuck in it, you're in that contracted space. Yeah. Anytime you're caught up in any kind of reaction emotionally, you tend to be caught up, you're in often a contracted space. So this spaciousness and contraction is part of ordinary life and always has been. But it feels like an essential part if you're looking at behavior change, because behavior change means I need to notice what I'm doing as I'm doing it, that I can hang on, stop, do something different, stop, do something different. Yeah. And it's noticing what's happening in my body as well as my mind. And that, again, that embodiment feels really crucial, that willingness to check into what's happening in me, what's going on in me, what's happening. Because often when we are caught up in a kind of contracted space, there's more of an emotional reactivity going on. And again, a mindfulness and a grounding, very simple experience of simple, what I would describe as feet on the floor and just breath for 2 minutes or so, and just bring the reactivity down, which again creates a little more space. Okay, so working with this is essential. One other really important thing with the mindfulness is if you're in your body, you're here. Otherwise, you get caught up in talking about stuff that's out there, past, present, past, future. Either way, you're not in the room with the person, and you want the person in the room with you. Again, getting them in embodied, and we're not talking about a long little meditation. We're talking about just 2 or 3 minutes of just grounding to get them in the room, again, so you can engage with them. And it's, again, my experience is quite important with men, because my experience of working with men is that there are the men who will talk too much, and there are men who don't talk very much at all. And for the men who talk too much, you really need the grounding, because they're talking too much about something else. They're not in the room. They're not in their bodies. They're not overly engaged with what's happening now. They're actually just out there. And so by bringing them just back to the moment, in which case you've got space to look at whatever they're actually talking about, what's actually going on. And with men who actually don't say much, having an opportunity just to ground, to be with their own experience, quietly, slowly, that can be more reassuring. There's no demand they've got to come out with this. It's like this. We slow everything down. Just take our time. Just what are you aware of? And from this space, okay, and we can start looking at whatever's going forward. Okay. So, and one other piece that feels important with all of this spaciousness is it's recognizing, as always what I point out in the meditation we just did at the beginning, there is a lot going on in you. You are not just one thing. And I always want to stress that with anyone I'm working with. The idea of yourself is inadequate. It's incomplete. Doesn't mean it doesn't have some accuracy, but there's more to you than that. And actually, the opportunity to start to see that you are more than often the limited idea you have of yourself as a man. Yeah. I mean, any idea of how a man ought to be is problematic, because you are going to be more than that. You're a human being who is not limited to a certain prescribed idea of this is what makes a man, this is what makes a woman. It's nonsense. We're human, and there's much more than that to us. And kind of starting to open that door to there's more to you than you realize. Okay. So the 2 other bits I want to put in here before I kind of open this out as responses, because is any behavior change, anything to change, responsibility is crucial. If I don't recognize I am responsible for what I say and do, I can't change what I say and do. The recognition that I am 100% responsible for everything I say, everything I do. Nobody else is making the words come out of my mouth. Nobody else is moving my arms, my legs, whatever. That's me. That also gives me the opportunity to do something different. To the extent that I think someone else is making me, provoking me, driving me, whatever it might be, I don't know how to change that without doing something to them, in which case we're usually going to be in problematic behavior. But that element of getting up, what I do, whatever the situation, I do have a choice. You know, someone points a gun at my head and said, do this or do that. I might choose to do this or do that, but I also know I still have a choice to say no. I mean, in that situation, I probably wouldn't, depending what they were asking me to do. But, you know, it's recognizing I am in charge of what I do next, always. I have the possibility of making choice. Sometimes those choices are not great ones, but nonetheless, they are still choices I can make. And that also means, from a larger perspective, okay, I can start to effectively be an agent of change for myself, which is the only way I'm ever going to make change. The second thing, which really fits in with what I said earlier on, is I'm responsible for managing my internal world once I reach adulthood. Ideally, I would have had support for that and learn how to do all that when I was actually a kid. But, you know, not all of us were lucky enough to have a family life that actually enabled us to do that, that supported us to do that. Doesn't matter. Now it's gone. It's like now I have to be my parent. I have to take basically responsibility for managing that. And that's a tough one, but it's basically reality based, and you don't argue with reality. And that's also really important. You're not there to be looked after anymore in that respect. Yeah, you're supported in lots of ways to pay attention, but you're not going to be looked after. You need to do that. Yeah. And the third point is whatever I do and say has got consequences. Everything. Just by doing nothing, just by existing, I'm having some impact on the world around me. And just then, okay, that's the reality. I want to be in charge of where I'm going, what I'm doing, what I'm saying. So I'm having the best influence I can on those consequences. But there's always going to be consequences, always. So that's the first point of, if you like, change. I'm not going to make any changes if I don't recognize consequences, if I don't recognize I'm responsible. And I'm not seeing that those internal thinking processes, feelings, I need to learn. I mean, the words I would use is to relate and support. Often people talk about managing them at a basic first level, that can be helpful. But ultimately, you want to be able to relate with these experiences and support, if you like, vulnerable feelings. Quite essential. Okay, well, it's 11 o'clock already. We've got 20 minutes. So the only other bit I want to put in is emotional regulation. That actually, and again, we're back with mindfulness, I need to basically start to relate with my internal world. And that includes all emotional experiences, vulnerable, difficult ones. And I'm very specific. I don't use the word negative. You do not have negative emotions. All your emotions are there for a purpose. You can relate to them negatively, for sure. You can generate them inappropriately, for sure. But the emotions themselves are neither positive nor negative. They're part of your basic human experience. Okay. And I mean, just said that's where I've got to stop. I'll just one other little bit. Behavior change takes practice. It's not a matter of light bulb moments. Whatever light bulb moment you have, you then have to start living that awareness, living what you've recognized you need to do differently, because that's what makes change. Insight is never enough. Practice. Practice is, again, an embodied, full-on, engaged experience. All right. That's enough. So I think for the next 20 minutes, we've got just our questions, responses, whatever's going on. or complete silence, and maybe no one's been listening to me anyway. It's the trouble with Zoom. You never know what's going on in people's minds out there. John, is there a way of people being able to... Yeah, okay, great.
Here's somebody coming.
Yeah, hi, Paul. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to find out, like I work with single men in direct provision centers, and they're from different parts of Africa, like different culture.
Yeah.
How do I manage scenarios like that in order to meet their individual needs?
So how do you manage?
To meet their individual needs in terms of from the culture and all that and religion.
Okay. Essentially, the points I'm making apply to me, to any human being anywhere. Yeah. So okay. In terms of managing their individual needs, if they don't have awareness, yeah, they will carry on doing things that aren't helpful for them, whatever they may be. Don't have to be destructive towards others. It can be a whole way of just unhelpful patterns. If they don't have a sense of that they are responsible for what they say and do, yeah, that's also going to be problematic. That's also how you make change. The other bit I would always put in, because I don't really care what culture you come in, at the end of the day, every human being, any culture has heart. And I would want to emphasize, look at the element of the relational side, that you are important, but so is everybody else. You and everybody. It's not just about you, but it does include you. And I would always want to question if anyone's got a sense I'm more important from that person, for whether it's some political, ideological, religious belief, I would just question that. Like, what does that, so these are sub people? Is that really? Does that really feel right? How does that feel right? These are all human beings, doesn't matter who they are. And but from a relational, from an inquiry, and this feels important. You want to be relating with the people. You don't want to be lecturing them. You don't want to be telling them off. You want to say, how does that work for you? How do you make sense of that? Would that be all right for you if it was the other way around? Okay. Yeah. So you're kind of, you're wanting them to get curious and interested.
Okay. Yeah. Is that... Yeah. No, because I'm planning to run a sexual health promotion with them after the bank holiday, and I'm kind of dreading it because really, I don't know. Yeah. Coming from a woman, like, I don't want to seem as if I'm imposing on them, but like, I have to share the information though, especially in terms of consent. Really, like, yeah, because they're just single men there. They really don't understand the cultural difference, especially when it comes to consent, because of where they're coming from. So like, yeah, I'm kind of dreading that, but like attending this is a basic for me to help myself to carry out that information session next week, like really.
Yeah, and I guess I'd always be that, are they actually interested in the other person? And if they're not, what is that saying? Follow the implication. Don't tell them what it's saying. Just say, if you're not interested in that person, if you're just using them, you're just basically think they're there for you. What is that saying about your attitude to them? What does that make them? And you're curious. You don't tell them what it's making. You say, tell me, what does that look like? And if it was the other way around, what would that feel like? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ustaz. Paul, there's a question from Alessandra in the chat bar. I have a question around the structure of the work. Does Paul use any kind of structure in the group, or only centering on body, mind, and being present?
Okay, so all right, so all of that was a general, it wasn't specific to working with domestic abuse. Yeah, there is a structure. So I'm guessing that question is very specific to do with working in a domestic abuse program with perpetrators of domestic abuse. Yeah, there's very definitely a structure. I mean, at the most simplistic level, if we're looking at group work, we'd have a structure of basically people checking in pretty briefly, like with just how they're feeling, how their week has been, totally in terms of anything that was being difficult or anything that's been abusive, and what they learned from the previous session. And then there'd be a kind of, have they been abusive in the past week? And all we want to know is just the basics there. We're going to go back and look at it afterwards, and have they had to avoid it, any situations they've had to avoid, and their alcohol and drug consumption. And on the basis of that, we'll do a check-in with everybody. We'll keep that very focused, so we're not actually starting to do any work with anyone or people are talking for too long. And then we will then follow up on what has been said, what feels important to look at. And that's not necessarily just what they said, but how they said it. And we'll do what's called matters arising. And out of that, that might be some work with individuals, and then we'll open it up to the group. How does that relate to you? And we don't want them to talk about, say, Fred, we've been working at. It's more, how do you recognize the issues we've just uncovered with Fred? How does that relate to you? And then out of that, we'll kind of often draw a thread for the second half of the session to, okay, what were the themes from there? You know, the themes might be expectations, themes might be guilt and shame, themes might be responsibility, themes might be actually, okay, how do you deal with, if you like, sanctions with your child in a kind of constructive, heartful way, rather than in a fearful, kind of overly threatening way, or whatever it might be there. So that would be this general, well, we have a whole bunch of themes we would weave in, but we tend to weave them in from the work as it goes along, wanting to cover a whole number of things over a period of, well, in our case, 30 weeks, 30 sessions. So that would be the most simplistic level of the structure. I could say a lot more about it, but I'm not sure in this context that it would be appropriate. But it's always possible to know more about that. Is that helpful?
That's great, Paul. There's a yes from Alessandra, and I see then from another question coming up, or at least let me read it, from Robert Bolton. Hi, Robert, from Cork, I think. I'm very impressed by the way you work. Do you have experience with adolescent young men and doing mindfulness activities with them? If so, what is your experience of how they respond to activities such as this?
Okay, Robert. Well, I'm afraid my answer to that is I've never worked with adolescent young men. So I've had 2 adolescent daughters, but I've never raised them. But working with adolescent young men, I haven't any direct experience of that. The youngest people we work with is usually 20, 21. So I would say with anyone younger, you've got to tailor what you're doing to where they are. And again, I think it's a big difference between a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old, for example. So I think what I can say is I think you definitely can use it, but you're going to need to have their interest, capture their interest in it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, I can't be more helpful there.
I don't know, just jump in and say if Robert wants to check out Dan Siegel, is a guy who does quite a bit of work on parenting and mindfulness with young people, an American guy, but he's worth checking out because he does it in a very engaging way. That's
excellent. There you go, Robert. There's the guy to go to.
Or she might be anyway.
Hi, Paul. Could I just ask you a very straightforward kind of a question?
Yep.
And if you have a man, and he says, "Oh, I can't control my anger," it goes from 1 to 10 in a fraction of a second. What would your response be to him?
Okay, so there's 2 things there. I think I would want to clarify, Derek, the internal experience and what he actually is doing with it. Yeah. So because so there's the internal experience of suddenly going in what he's recognizing is from 1 to 10, though I suspect he was never at 1 in the first place. Most people going very quickly up, but already at something like 3 or 4, bubbling along, not really noticing it. But in terms of what he's doing with his anger, when he says he can't control it, my question in that is, so when you're doing that, who have you killed? Who have you put in intensive care? Because when someone really goes out of control, which thankfully is very rare, that's what happens. Yeah. So it's clearly when he says, well, obviously that hasn't happened. I would say, so let's look at what do you do when you say you're angry and you can't. Let's look at what you're doing. And in that process, you can also look at what he's not doing. Yeah. Because someone really is going wild, you would say completely unconscious, not knowing what they're doing. As I said, serious damage is happening. And I would also take him through, let's have a look at what you're doing and what's going on in you. And invariably, there's going to be some conscious decision about what he's doing. Yeah, so taking him through one of these incidents when it's happened. Okay, so now you've gone up to 10. What do you do next? Let's look at what you're doing and what's going on in your mind, and let's take it very step by step, very concretely. Where are you in relationship to whatever space you're in? Where is whoever else is there? You kind of, because people remember much better if you're very concrete. Just take them very slowly. So in terms of their behavior, I would say they're definitely not out of control. He may feel out of control, that's different, but he's actually not behaving completely out of control. There's a definite decision making going on or choices being made in terms of what he does and what he doesn't do. In terms of the experience internally, I would be looking at, let's go back and let's look at what was going on beforehand. Because what is true, some people have nervous systems that are very wired and they go very quickly up, but usually they're not going from 0 to 10. They're already bubbling along at 3. And they can go from 3 or 4 to 10 way quicker than someone else. But that 3 or 4 is happening and they haven't paid attention to that. It's almost like as soon as that's going on, you need to notice it if you've got that kind, if you're wired that way. And okay, how do I settle myself down back to a 2 or a 1? Yeah. And again, mindfulness, grounding, being aware of what's going on in the body and as well as what's going on in the kind of thinking process is going to be quite essential, because he's going to be almost certainly winding himself up to a certain extent with what he's thinking and feeling very reactive without having a sense, I just need to settle this. Just ground, stop.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Yeah.
Okay. I feel the tightness of the time in these descriptions here. I would love to spend more time saying more, but somebody else.
Hello, maybe I can ask a question. I came in late, so I'm sorry I missed a lot of your conversation. But with regard to today, a lot of men are feeling confused and also angry and not sure about how to assert themselves when the issues of gender conversations come up. I'm thinking of men are confused and men are not sure about how to address issues about male, female, the issues that are so every day in our conversations. A lot of men feel that they're being demeaned in the public sphere and socially as well, and are afraid to in conversations, social conversations, to assert themselves with other men as well as with other women, because they feel that men are under attack. And have you any particular strategies or tips on how men who would feel reserved or hesitant about addressing these feelings, because it's overwhelmingly very much in the public place that men are very I hate to use the word, but we hear this word patriarchal and toxic, etc. and men feeling inadequate in responding to those things. Now, you know, mindfulness, etc., that's great. It's very important, but specifically for those issues, if you have any kind of tips, because this is a gender symposium issue.
Okay, so there's a need in this to contextualize the whole thing, yeah? In terms of men being attacked, it's like they're kind of seeing things from a certain perspective, yeah?
Yeah.
Because, I don't know about in Ireland, but in England, the most people running everything are still men, you know? Parliament, look at...
well, not so much in the media.
Well, it's
in the
like,
marketing.
But the element is, in terms of what feels most important is, okay, what is actually being criticized and how much does that relate to me personally? Yeah. Because there will always be people who are criticized. I mean, the media has been a toxic environment in my entire life. It's, you know, certain parts of the media, in England particularly, most of the newspapers are vile in terms of the way they work. However, the question is, how does that relate to me? And how does that relate to me as a man? And the question I always bring up when we talk about men, there's not some homogenous group of men. It doesn't exist. We're all different. We are, you know, we are individual males in a collective environment, but we're not all the same.
Yeah, but the perspective is that we are looked on as not individual men, but as men. And that's the problem.
But part of that's the problem is the actual internal perspective. Yeah. If I'm thinking I should be a certain type of man, I'm buying into that collective idea that I'm not actually. I always talk, for me, when I work with men, I say, I'm not really interested in anybody's idea of how a man ought to be, because that's just somebody's idea. The question for you is, and for each one of us is, what is the man I can be? Yeah, that takes into account my qualities, my abilities, not someone's idea of me, and how am I living that? And how do I allow myself to develop that? And for as long as I'm looking outside for guidance of I ought to be this way to be a man, I've got a problem. So I would always want to deconstruct that whole idea of a man is this or a man is that, whether it's a toxic idea of men or a supposedly, you know, a very positive idea of men. I would say that isn't necessarily you. You need to get...
No, it's not, no, but we are part of society. So we are individuals, but we also live in society, and we have to respect and understand the other person, not just our own. We have to see what they're feeling, what they're thinking.
I agree completely. And in reality of life is, I'm going to come across all sorts of things, depending on my background, that aren't particularly pleasant or fair. Guess what? I'm not the only one. And it's not specific to the fact that I'm male or I'm white or I'm kind of spiritually oriented without a religion. None of that's it happens to everybody has some of that, and some of us have more than others. How do I relate with that constructively? Yeah. And I would say about privilege is a very interesting thing about privilege, which I think is so essential. The issue is not having privilege, because that's inevitable that different people are going to have privilege for a whole bunch of reasons. It's what do you do with it? Do you exploit it for your own gain, or do you use it to actually be able to contribute more? And that's always the question, is what do you have to offer, not just what are you going to get?
Sure.
An orientation of when I've got something to offer, and can I feel good about what I've got something to offer?
Yeah, but if you're in the minority in the public space, Paul, it's very difficult for one to assert oneself. And that's what I was asking about. In other words, when people feel that, okay, I know myself, I have my feelings, I am a person as well as a male, but in the public space, if you're feeling, well, again, you have to control your own feelings about this. But if you want to assert yourself in the public space and respond to what you might think is needs to be responded to, and not just say, well, I don't care, it doesn't have nothing to do with me because I know who I am and I can control myself. But the public is changing, and each individual has to have an input into society. And we're not giving it as males. I feel that we're falling a bit behind. Women have been at the since the 70s talking about these. We've been talking about football. We've been talking about, and we've been in the pubs, etc. We're not articulate enough.
Yeah, okay.
And that's a real problem. And I feel that men are feeling that they don't have the wherewithal, the coping skills to in this environment.
Okay.
Paul, just conscious of time, so if you can maybe round up with your comment. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah.
Thanks,
I would
Donald.
say, okay, Donald, the thing I would really be focusing on is that guy looking to be looked after, to get stuff? Or is they looking to actually recognize where they are supported and what they need to contribute? That's part one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other element is gone out of my head right now, so I'm going to have to stay with that.
No problem, Paul. Thanks for your appreciate
Thanks, Donald.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate those of you who have attended and contributed. And thanks, Paul, for jumping in a very constricted time space and giving us some very helpful pointers in terms of working with men and behavior change. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.